Hey, and welcome to the Art Project Podcast. We're talking with artists about their current projects, their past works, and everything in between. This is your host, Camila Moreiras. We are joined today by MacArthur Fellow Michelle Dorrance, founder and artistic director of Dorrance Dance, alongside brother and musical collaborator, Donovan. Welcome, you two.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
I do want to center the conversation today on your project, The Center Will Not Hold, which, Michelle, you are directing and creating with B-girl Ephrat Asherie. But before we get into the present day, I did want to go back in time. You founded Dorrance Dance in 2011, and by 2015, you were a MacArthur Fellow, receiving the so-called Genius Grant. Prior to this, you were a Princess Grace awardee, and in the years since, you and your company have also been recognized as a Ford Foundation Art of Change Fellow and as a Doris Duke Artist. Over the years, you've been commissioned to produce work for the Martha Graham Dance Company, the Guggenheim Museum in New York, and the American Ballet Theatre, just to name a few. But I imagine with the way that the nomination process of the MacArthur Grant unfolds, it may have come as a surprise to you. Was this the case? Was it a total shock to the system to be recognized in this way? And how did it impact the growth of your company?
Yeah, it was an outrageous shock. And the truth is, I, first of all, rest and stand on the shoulders of so many, all of my elders and also my peers and the peers that are even just a little bit older than me who have been pushing and innovating and are deeply creative and have inspired me and informed me. And not to mention the dancers that are younger than I am that inspire me to create work. And, but I say this to say the tap community is very small and there has not been a lot of acknowledgement in the larger cultural landscape. And so I do believe in the work that I've been creating and that I was creating at the time. And I was very pointedly putting it in spaces that at first were not necessarily seeking it out. And so I think I was acknowledged because of the work I was doing in those spaces. So I can make sense of what happened. But it did really help. Of course, I was literally about to go bankrupt. I had maxed out 7 credit cards and I was avoiding phone calls from numbers I didn't know because they were usually debt collectors. So I avoided the phone call for a really long time without knowing it. And they were like, "You've been really hard to get a hold of." And I was like, oh gosh, it was a room full of people on the call. I was about to get on the train. No, I got on the train, I think. And it went underground and I was like, oh my gosh.
And this was before Wi-Fi was
dropped.
in there.
Yes. And they called back and I'd gotten off the train and gotten in a cab. And I just well, if there's some money coming my way, I can afford a cab right now. So the whole thing was a shock and also deeply supportive. The way that I can accept it is that it helped bring the work that I believe in doing for the community and for the art form. It helped support that and also just helped bring such a different lens of focus towards tap dance and what was possible with the art form. Not just by me, but by so many others.
Mm-hmm. So, by that time, your company was only 4 years old, 2011 to 2015. So did you know that you wanted to use the funds specifically to grow your company, or did you not know exactly how that was going to play out?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Without that grant at that time, there simply just would have been, I think, a different trajectory for me and for the quote company. And the dream for me was that I wanted to create work. I didn't understand how much support it would need once it had the demand. And so I just was constantly scrambling to catch up and to just try to get the work done myself, and then engaged a handful of people here and there to start helping. But yeah, I didn't go to business school. It was a learning curve.
Okay, so from what I know of you, you believe very strongly in expounding the history of tap as an important element of continuing the art form's legacy, particularly as it is a predominantly Black American art form. I know that there are Irish influences here, but if I'm not mistaken, it is as much an experience of enslaved Africans brought to the Americas as it is an embodiment of revolutionary march or a spiritual hymn. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely.
Okay. Your company's website, which I will link in the show notes, does an exemplary job of providing resources for those who are interested in learning about tap dancers, both historical and contemporary. But I'm also curious how you incorporate this educative model into your dances and choreography.
When I am creating, I'll find myself into something that is so rooted in some brilliant idea that like can be literally footnoted directly to one of our elders. And I am so lucky to have been a teenager around so many like, I have used the phrase because like trying to write about this without like having spent a ton of time working on my writing. I just try to invite people who don't understand the history of tap dance into the space. Like I call the folks my generation spent time with in our teen years and then like into our early 20s a little bit. But I call those elders who were in their 70s, 80s, and 90s during those decades the last hoofers of the jazz era. So people understand those folks were also, some of them, in movie musicals and lived in these different spaces, but some of them didn't intersect that kind of work at all. They were vaudevillians. Some of them literally just performed inside of, jazz music legacy. And some were entertainers. I mean, there are like a lot of different markings of the people that had the most influence on us from an era that we basically have no relationship to its development in our lived experience. So I say all of that to say, when I'm creating, there is rarely a moment in which I'm not reminded of someone, like an innovator from the 40s or mid-century, or like we are so imprinted upon by individual stylists that it's the way I think a lot of us teach as well. When I'm teaching something, I'm saying this little idea actually is a slidism, is a Jimmy Slidism. I'm doing this with it, and actually this little thing that I'm doing, I could probably directly footnote Savion Glover's influence on me here. I could and I try to communicate it as much as possible because the generations under us, if they're being informed by us, unless we're saying it, they are less aware.
Right.
But so like inside of the fabric of the words I'm using, so the vocabulary I'm using with my feet and my body and even rhythmic ideas, is that history. And because tap dance is an oral tradition, like all we can do is speak this history into existence in the creative process or in an educational process. And it's another reason we're so committed to lecture demonstrations. And I am now trying to shake off my, not fear, but like it's so stressful to speak. It's so much easier to do a Q&A because then you can just sort of stream of, you don't have to be as intentional or pointed or prepared.
Right.
But it is really important. I've been doing a lot more speaking because engaging folks with a deeper understanding of the history in this way, in conversation or in spoken language, is really important. But
that continues the oral tradition.
Yes. Otherwise, a lot of folks won't have the context to understand. I want to believe that audiences can sense the depth of what's happening in a given work without us having to be on the nose about quoting someone. Right? Like, I don't need to do someone's step exactly as they did it for it to live inside of the fabric of what I'm doing. And in fact, I find everything those generations encouraged us as teenagers to be was individual artists with unique voices, because that's one of the greatest traditions of tap dance solo work. It's fucking incredible.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I mean, I know nothing really about dance, let alone tap, but thinking through art in general and just lived experience, the best way to understand something is to come from it through an embodied way.
Yeah.
And there's so many unspoken things that get just transferred to us.
That's a great way for anybody to relate to that, I think. I think that was well said. Yeah, just like anybody can, go back to something that they've grown up with that's been part of their life the whole time and recognize like, oh, that's what that tap dance is for you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I recently interviewed pianist and composer Chris Padishall, who has his musical roots in jazz. And now to be interviewing you and Donovan, Michelle, I'm very thrilled to be able to continue promoting and celebrating Black arts. But it's also not lost on me that these conversations are being had through a white lens. And I'll say that I do identify as a Hispanic woman, but also white. And you two and Chris Padishall are also white. I know that you had the opportunity, and you just mentioned it, to study under some of the last hoofers. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on the context of what that word means or who they are for our listeners. But I wanted to get a sense of how you see yourself within the lineage of tap dance and how you see its future and progress. This question is really for both of you. Donovan, perhaps you can talk about your role of scoring original music for the performances. And Michelle, I was hoping you could take this in the direction of speaking to choreography and improvisation against tradition and innovation. So just a side note to help explain what I mean here. In flamenco, for example, which is another music and dance form that incorporates tap and step in both the dance and through the wood of the guitar, there is an ever-pervasive discussion about losing the historical through more contemporary interpretations and fusions, a discussion that is surely contextualized by the diaspora of the Roma people. So here, different history, but perhaps similar concerns.
So first, I think it's really important, and this is something that I could have said back when we were talking about the MacArthur, I can think even more pointedly understand and identify my role now that just with the past decade plus of experience with my company and also just with creating work, I am someone that dance audiences I'm so accessible. I am like the least threatening. I'm a white woman representing a form that a lot of folks view American cultural and historical context as deeply related to minstrelsy. And when truly American culture, period, is rooted in minstrelsy. Like everything that is uniquely American comes from the white imitation of enslaved people's culture. That is the core of a lot of our culture. Music, dance, all the things. Now, a lot of that music developed and then was embraced in different ways, jazz very specifically. Tap dance is continuously pigeonholed by a number of different communities, and this history is largely so uncomfortable for people, especially white people, to investigate that I think it's just been easier to not invite tap dance into spaces or into conversations, right? And so the way I started creating work with a couple of different edges to it while never abandoning the deep tradition that lives in. I mean, it's the only way. I am never going to tap dance in a way that isn't rooted in who I am. I mean, I like my mentors are people I am still so inspired by and so deeply admire. I continue to seek after their essence. Like I will never abandon the historical language that is the core of who I am. And pushing tap dance into spaces where mostly only contemporary dance and ballet and contemporary ballet and modern dance live. I think folks could access this, I think, very authentic art form, but in context to these other things that they also understand as high art or art with a capital A. And tap dance is often relegated into this space of being entertainment or folkloric or, rooted in minstrelsy, which is just like a completely different thing. The folks that we refer to as the hoofers, and actually that word can be polarizing in my community because, like, are you a hoofer or are you a tap dancer? Is its own conversation, which we cannot get into and still have time to talk about everything else on this podcast, but some other time when you really want to deep dive. But what I would say is there are a number of tap dancers of that era that are called the hoofers, right? Which was a group of soloists that came together to dance, but also to still represent their individual styles. There was another organization called the Copacetics, also hoofers of that time period, that formed upon Bilbo Jangles Robinson's death. So Bilbo Jangles Robinson dies, and in honor of his legacy, both musicians and tap dancers, actually Billy Strayhorn was an original Copacetic. And Billy Strayhorn, for those who don't know, basically composer and arranger with Duke Ellington, I think a lot of his work is unsung, but also whatever. We can talk about his queer legacy some other time. But
you can bring it in now if you want to.
But yeah, there's like to try to get to what you were just describing. So these hoofers, Copacetics, but largely tap dancers of the 40s and mid-century. So when also swing, big bands, jazz music largely was shifting into something that was much more interesting percussively, which was bebop. And tap dancers, we know, are known for deeply influencing the drummers of that era, that deeply influenced the horn players of that era. And that is how a lot of that rhythmic development happened. those ideas, a lot of bebop ideas are tap dance ideas. And actually, to do a very, very shallow dive into tap dance's influence on American music, period, the early stride piano players say, well, there's like an early stride piano player that just said, oh gosh, I was just imitating my favorite tap dancer. That's how I got this pulse. So the pulse of early jazz lives in tap dance. Modern drumming is a tap dance pattern. 6 bars of a pattern with a 2-bar break is a tap dance pattern that predates jazz music. So all of this stuff to say, the hoofers from that time period are both dancers and musicians that have influenced us. And this could be folks that were as famous as the Nicholas brothers, who were hugely famous in movie musicals, and as obscure to some people that might not know anything about tap dance as dancers like Chuck Green. And as per any form in any history through the early 20th century, a lot of women are not noted, or their contributions forgotten, not written about. The opportunities were not the same. So I just want to acknowledge, and I have a dear friend, incredible tap dancer peer, Ayodele Casel, does a lot of work to try to honor these women. There's a woman that was around with these hoofers, herself also a brilliant hoofer, named Jenny Lagan. And when I mentioned having access to like a lot of the gathering of these folks at once, the St. Louis Tap Festival was a hugely important gathering every summer in the 90s while these folks were still alive. So it's where I met Jenny Lagan and met Jimmy Slide and met Buster Brown and met both of the Nicholas brothers and Charlie Atkins that was a part of Honey Coles and Charlie Atkins duo. Honey Coles had a huge influence on my teacher mentor who founded the North Carolina Youth Tap Ensemble and, you know, has a legacy here in the Triangle area, Gene Medler. And he is the reason that we all as young people went to these festivals in the 90s when no one even knew tap festivals were happening. He brought us to St. Louis because he'd been deeply influenced by Honey Coles and Brenda Buffalino, his protege, who's now in her 80s and is a mentor and is the reason we named the work The Center Will Not Hold. So we can get there later.
Okay, perfect.
But I say all of those names to say, you know, for anyone who's interested, please look them up. But these are folks that were innovators, individual stylists, and, you know, dancer musicians of that era.
Wonderful. Donovan. I'm also very curious about just your role with creating the music for these pieces and for the dancers.
Sure. Yeah, my involvement is just nepotism. My perspective is smaller in scope. I just love my sister and I love her crew that she's brought me into, and I just love music. My influences are pretty wide, but so many of them come from my sister, and so I think there's, you know, direct traces back to her as a tap dancer and what is compelling to her. And so we have this running joke of like referencing our relationship around music to this film Almost Famous. Have you seen this?
I love that film.
So the older sister in that movie leaves home. There's like an age gap between the older sister and the younger brother, and she like leaves home for college or is like running away from the sort of controlling mom, and she's like, little brother, here's all my records, you know, like hard rock, like don't let mom hear you, but like here's like your gift, like opening your ears to, you know, amazing music. So that's kind of what happened with Michelle and I. She just gave me a bunch of great shit to listen to, and it deeply influenced my tastes, and then eventually the stuff that I make. I just love working with her, and when she likes something that I've made, that's like my favorite feeling. I don't think I say that to you enough, but yeah, I mean, you know, when anybody likes your shit, it's like, oh, that's nice, you know. You were making it for yourself, and that's like the first hurdle is like, oh, do I like my own stuff?
Do you feel like you make these things for yourself and then present it to be a possible musical piece for the performances or for Dorrance Dance, or is it more directly related?
Yeah, that's a great question. A little bit of both. So many of the little like nugget little musical ideas have come from just being on tour with Dorrance Dance, with my sister's dance company, and having some downtime and sitting at the piano and dorking around and just throwing my phone voice memos on and just recording little ideas. And then those ideas that were originally just, you know, me feeling the vibes have turned into pieces of choreography and then eventually like a sort of evening length show. So that's been super cool to see that happen, like something as simple as like a little voice memo turning into like something on stage for hundreds of people to watch. Super cool. And then other times, like the stuff we're working on right now, is very much Michelle and Ephrat, choreographers of this piece we're working on, The Center Will Not Hold, asking me for specific feelings, moods, genre, tempos for specific works, and then me, going to work on those. Just happy to be here.
I would make an argument, though, Camila, that first of all, Donovan, while I think some of the things that I'm deeply compelled by that he creates are melodic, he is deeply percussive. And one of the reasons, he can just say nepotism as a blanket answer for why we work together. And also it described this like exaggerated version of me slowly over the course of time giving him music and CDs. But I love the idea of the reference to Almost Famous, because there was a time where I gave him like a Rage Against the Machine album and I didn't realize how young he was, I guess, in my mind. And Mom came downstairs and you were listening to like, fuck you, I won't do it. Yeah, like, God bless. Nor is our mother controlling about what we listen to. But sorry, I was going to say that one of the things that Donovan honors without questioning and would probably never make a pointed reference to the history of tap dance or the artists that I mentioned before as part of this jazz musical legacy is Donovan treats me like a composer, which not a lot of musicians do or have the open-mindedness or perspective and understanding and genuine respect to do. Mm-hmm. And so when he's creating something and he knows there will be a percussive compositional score living with it, he will create something to support it, to be in counterpoint to it. Sometimes we'll create something that we know we want to play in unison or in, quote, harmony. And I can speak in rhythmic terms to him and ask for something that helps support the feel of what we do. And so Donovan, and the way that he engages with and supports and elevates, I think the musical legacy of tap dance is really, and also, he can create something against which we will swing, right? Or in tandem with, what if we could have this pocket here and you guys could swing to this? Like we were just talking about this recently for this project. What if the real harsh swing and garage could live inside of this, the scope of this particular piece, even though there's not anyone who's like a UK-based club dancer. We all have sensibilities that sit with that, and his understanding of that is why he knows this is a good idea. And it came from him, not from us asking for it. And of course, it immediately asks us into a space in a different way in relationship to our legacies. So, and I say that about the other dancers in this particular work, who are all collaborators, first of all, brilliant artists and unique artists unto themselves, and live, some of them, at the intersection of many styles. Like Ephrat is a B-girl, but also a house dancer, and like literally a practitioner of so many street and club forms. And then there are folks that represent very deeply community and kind of city specific forms. So like Mike Manson is a Detroit JIT dancer. Lil Buck, who was part of the original project, is one of the most well-known jokers from Memphis. Chicago-based tap dancer and Chicago footworker, Donetta Little Bit Jackson, is literally inviting tap dancers into the footwork community in Chicago because she was first a tap dancer and then became a Chicago footwork dancer. And Beastie, incredible dancer of so many genres, is representing a footwork-driven form that comes from Harlem called Light Feet.
All these dancers are in the show The Center Will Not Hold that we're expanding.
Yeah.
Well, it's a great moment to pivot more fully into the project, bringing this into the work that you are developing now with Ephrat, The Center Will Not Hold. I thought it would be interesting to start with asking about the title of the piece. For me, there are three main references to this phrase. W.B. Yeats, interestingly an Irish poet, so maybe there's even a little bit more of a connection to tap dance there. The ancient Greek poet Hesiod, and more contemporaneously, the American writer Joan Didion in her essay Slouching Toward Bethlehem, when she writes, and I quote, "The center was not holding." So whether writing in the future simple tense or the past progressive, what likens the feeling of the phrase, I think, is the dichotomy between fragility and strength. To bring this towards your project, what struck me when watching footage of the 30-minute version of this performance was how powerful this tension of strength and fragility felt. Literally in terms of the physicality of the music, of the dance, of the dancers, but also more figuratively with respect to what we've been discussing: resilience, revolution, endurance, community. I'm very curious as to both your perspectives on the title of this project. Michelle, you from the perspective of giving name to it, but Donovan, of how you come to interpret this as a performer within the dance company and as somebody charged with adding huge influence to its meaning through writing its music. And I will add, just because you touched on the vast genres and styles of dance that your dancers are bringing to the table, it was also really incredible to see that melding of genre within the piece itself. You know, like even the shoes that you guys wear, right? Like you're often wearing Adidas high tops, very much not typical tap dancing shoes. It's a bit of an open-ended question.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, thank you, actually, because you have such wonderfully layered questions. I'm like, shit, did I get to half of that? Probably not. Okay, so I mentioned this before, but Brenda Buffalino, so we had... Gosh, I'm trying to think when they both joined this project. Give me 2 seconds. I'll start here and I'll get to the title. Ephrat and I, in an evening presentation of my company by the Joyce Theater in New York City, I was premiering 2 works. One was featuring an incredible composer, vocalist, Erin Marcellus, that I work with quite a bit. And one was featuring the women that were my elders in STOMP. A show that I was a part of for many years. And I realized I had another desire inside of this evening, and it was to just sort of speak to I gave myself the gift of creating a little poem for the evening is the way I would consider it, because these 2 works were longer. And I wanted to make something with my best friend, and I wanted it to just be about how we were feeling in that moment in time. And this was the winter of 2022. So, we created a short, and I also asked Donovan, or maybe, you want to know what? I did not ask Donovan. Donovan was playing for me some of the music for his new album. And I heard this piece and immediately was moved to creative ideas. And this will just happen. Sometimes I can see something on stage, or I'll understand an emotional arc that lives in physical space with physical bodies. And so that's how I'll know, oh gosh, shit, I want to create to this piece of music.
She said, "This belongs to me now."
No, I didn't. But I did ask, would you be open to me creating something to that, like maybe for me and Ephrat? And Ephrat adores Donovan like a little brother as well. And of course, he was like super supportive of that. And then I asked, of course, as I do with Donovan's composition, I'd be like, would you be willing to alter a few things inside of this to support the like dance, the emotional narrative of this particular work? And he was like, of course. Donovan is so generous in that regard as a composer. And he understands that like he would never want something with a section that repeated this many times to exist for a listener without a visual arc to accompany it. But he will do that for us, understanding that we're building physical energy as well. So we created a short duet called A Little Room. And the entire thing was executed in actually a very small square of light with quite a few effects by our brilliant lighting designer, Kathy Kaufman. And Ephrat had an upcoming project in collaboration with this brilliant dancer, Ayodele, a legacy hip-hop dancer and artist and creator unto himself. And that opportunity, I don't know, I was going to get invited into space with them to help create a percussive element inside of like a closing number for this hip-hop festival. That didn't end up happening, but the organization commissioning that ended up commissioning Ayodele to create a new work and wanted to commission Ephrat and I to create a new work. And we were really interested in the work that we were going to create something with footworkers, a lot of folks that had footwork-driven styles. And so that is an immediate, to me, it means like, oh, all the different styles that have a relationship to tap dance that are a part of the African diaspora, but also the tap dance, the American tap dance diaspora. So, and that's so many different hip hop styles. So that said, we got really excited about the opportunity to do this, and the brilliant visionary, I would say, at New York City Center that helps commission and curate, and, he's the artistic director of the dance arm of City Center, Stanford Makishi, said, if you wanted to root the work that you're going to create in that duet the two of you made, you could totally do that. And we immediately felt invited into this space that neither of us at the point of collaboration ever feel invited into, because we were commissioned to do this for Fall for Dance Festival. And in my mind, I'm like, they want a show closer. Like, I know, you know what I mean? Like, I know what it is. I know what percussive dance is in a lot of spaces, and it's this joy bomb, right? And in this particular tune that supports A Little Room, it has an edge to it And what we're exploring emotionally inside of it lends itself to the title. So I will get to that part of the question. And lends itself to, I think, the energy a lot of us are feeling right now with the literal rise of fascism. And that energy, those ideas, divisiveness, hatred, to be invited in to investigate that energy, the energy that lives inside of the tension in this song and in the emotional investigation Ephrat and I were after in this original work, we were really excited and then realized, okay, we can make a piece about right now. And we can do it with dancers that this will resonate with immediately through lived experience and also being a part of these art forms that represent a culture of struggle and transcendence. And each dancer is both an improvisational soloist and also part of a community that is really strong, right? So to me, that essence that lives inside of Black forms in America, we all intersect at those languages. It was only a gift to be able to jump into this space with these dancers. And each of us at the very beginning of the process taught a class, or, many of us taught a class in these really refined forms to the other dancers that live in. Everyone had a vocabulary that could relate to the different dialects or the different languages, of footwork. But to try on everyone's approach and everyone's groove and literally just technical execution was incredible. Like literally the first 2 days, that's what we did. Everyone is teaching and learning and growing and more deeply understanding the way we have to be able to even speak our own languages to each other and understand, and also take a shot at speaking someone's language in order to communicate more clearly, right? And never would any of us be experts quickly, but to want to honor the way these intersect, we had to more deeply understand them. And I think even just that practice, that it lives inside of the essence of this particular work, is really important. And the way we describe what we're after as a cast, as a community of dancers, is we're trying to pull off a bank robbery for the revolution. So what we're up to is very refined and very specific and life or death and illegal, but the right thing to do. And, those are very, very, very two-dimensional and very like a shallower understanding of the larger thing that we are up to in radical community in this piece. And some of these like forms of expression is folks fighting for their lives. Like what could possibly happen very soon in this country is the erasure of art and the erasure of freedom of expression. And in a sense, it does feel like being able to live as a person that doesn't subscribe to totalitarian, I don't even want to say Christian regime because none of the tenets of any of those ideas are Christian. But yeah, a really...
You're building something that's greater than
we're trying
some of its parts.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that everyone inside of this space is a part of that in their own way, in their forms of expression, whether or not they identify that in a political sense. It really just is about humanity.
Right. Well, I think that goes back to an earlier discussion that we were having of embodiment. All of the dancers are bringing in their own embodied experience. You're creating something as a group. That's another form of embodied experience. And then we as the viewers and listeners are also given another embodied experience.
So the title has a direct relationship to that energy, first of all, in thinking about Yeats. Brenda Buffalino, who I mentioned before, who is the protege of Charles Honey Coles, who is the person that revolutionized my mentor, Gene Medler's understanding of tap dance. And I'll never forget, he came back to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and into class and said to me, Michelle, I was 9 years old. He was like, Michelle, we're changing everything. And completely changed the way he taught us technique, completely changed what our focus in class was. It was nuts. It was amazing. So I say this to say, Brenda and Honey have had a huge influence on Gene. And unfortunately, Honey Coles passed from a stroke before I had the chance to meet him. I was so young. But I have gotten to know and am deeply influenced by and grateful for and mentored by Brenda Buffalino. She is now 87, I believe. And I also mentioned the origin of this work was that it was commissioned by New York City Center and presented at Fall for Dance. And now it's going to have a life as a full evening work. Ephrat and I both sought artistic advisors for this process. And Brenda Buffalino was sort of living inside of the legacy of tap dance and also just as a brilliant artist in so many different directions. And Emilio Buddha Stretch, who is a mentor of Ephrat's and a brilliant hip-hop dancer choreographer, elder, but he's not nearly as old as Brenda Buffalino in that community. They were our artistic advisors for this process. And in conversation with Brenda, she was explaining that basically in the creation of the work, she was giving us some instructions as to if we did not continue to center the core of how we started this thing, which is a deeply emotional relationship between me and Ephrat, if we don't keep that essence, right, at the core of this work, the center will not hold. I mean, when she's giving you advice or corrective criticism, it's intense and amazing, but she kept repeating herself. I was like, geez. She said, yeah, I don't know. Is that Yeats? Like, why am I saying that? But but that's it. She just like channels like all of this influence. And so I, of course, then looked up the poem and remembered I had read it at some point in my life. And I think the essence of this particular work is so much about that. Like, things will fall apart. And Donovan, I believe that a lot of it's both the textures and tension that live inside of the way he plays a muted piano or prepared piano. I think there is so much present in that the piano is both an instrument of incredible sustained melodic ideas and also really acute percussion. I think there's so much inside of that. And that is really, his first, and I think you would say, favorite instrument. And even though not everyone is a percussive dancer in this group of artists, everyone to me is a visually percussive dancer. Everyone is a deeply musical dancer.
Yeah.
And our relationship, I mean, we are sewn into the fabric of the music, sewn into the fabric of what we create. I mean, they're inextricable. So, and that is not the way a lot of choreographers work. Some choreographers create to one piece of music and then have a piece of music written for the work. Some people create and then someone writes music after the creation. Some people are purposefully not musical, are not interested in a musical exploration of movement. It's really about a somatic experience, right? The why is the music often for us. For a lot of us, I think every single artist in that group of artists would say, yeah, the music is the why so often, more often than not. So, yeah, I'll kick it over to Donovan.
Well, here, going back to the bank robber revolutionary themes, I think once you first told me about that informed a lot of the energies that I had in mind when approaching, little motif ideas or whatever. And then, of course, anytime I'm working with you, I know that we're both just such huge fans of not just liminal, moody, melodic and harmonic ideas, but also just dope percussive things. So then approaching the piano as a percussive instrument, which it is, that is its category. It's not a stringed instrument, even though it has strings. It is a percussive instrument because of the nature of the way it's performed. So hammers striking the strings themselves. So approaching the instrument in that way, which is my favorite way to approach that instrument, just fucking banging away on it. And then shoving objects inside. Michelle mentioned I'm sort of preparing the piano and then muting it with my fingers. So extended techniques, shoving objects I bought from Lowe's into the strings, which for any classical pianist would be a nightmare because you're, damaging things and putting it out of tune a little bit, but making it even more percussive. So making it even more of what it actually is. And then that being, completely related to your dance form and your approach. And then adding gravitas to these revolutionary themes. I don't know if this was ever said. This work exists right now in a half-hour form. So the first performance of it was 30 minutes of dance and music. So that existed. That was performed. And then it's been commissioned to be lengthened to an hour. So we are adding to what we worked on, pulling in more ideas, exploring areas that we hadn't, but then also referencing things we've already touched upon. And yeah, it's been a blast.
Well, I love your answer about the piano as a percussive instrument and the extended techniques that you're using, because I think that is such a good analogy for the title, The Center Will Not Hold. You are forcing a continuation for survival that comes from an organic place. I mean, there were so many things that both of you guys said that really like spun the wheels for
But
me.
I love the way you just encapsulated that. It was great.
Yeah.
I'm like in deep admiration of that. It's so awesome.
Thanks. But I think, and this is why I don't know anything about grammar. So when I was talking about the future simple and past progressive, I mean, I asked ChatGPT what those tenses were, right?
I love it.
The reason that I wanted to highlight that is because there is, I think, a gravitas that comes with the center will not hold versus the center is not holding. But both of those phrasings never imply a forfeit, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
you're always
in the fight.
You're always in the fight.
Yes.
Even if hope can waver or can ebb and flow. So I think forcing through the organic is just such a beautiful thing that you guys are doing. And I really applaud it. And I'm so looking forward to watching the full performance, which is due to debut in March 2025.
Yes. It will debut in March 2025 and then comes to Chapel Hill with Carolina Performing Arts at Memorial Hall in April.
Okay.
Yes.
Pretty much
be on
the following
lookout.
week.
Yeah.
Okay.
The week
Where is it
after.
performing? At City Center in New York?
In New York, we don't have a New York performance yet.
Wow.
Podcast listeners.
There we go.
Not on the books. No, it debuts on tour basically and immediately goes on tour. And I want to say something about what you said because I feel like, Camila, like this conversation will invite us into investigating this space because I think it's really important. The center was not holding or is not holding. The center will not hold. And gosh, I can't believe I haven't mentioned him yet, but we have one person in the cast that is not at the forefront of his artistry, a footwork-driven dancer, but he can tap dance, and he is literally a world champion snare drummer and a fellow stomper with me. Like, we trained together in stomp. And actually, the woman that trained us, Fritzlin Hector, who was one of the, I call them bad bitches, that were in the work that I mentioned earlier, is also in the work. She's a dancer of the diaspora. She's unbelievable. Just multiform dancer in New York City. But I mentioned John Angeles, who will play percussion live in the work as an energy that you are not sure at the very beginning of this work whether his powers are for good or evil.
Ooh.
Like, you don't really know if he is serving the darker edge of this or the hopeful edge of this.
I see.
But he is 100% a part of this revolution. And of course, to us, he is something that charges it because he's the person playing live music the entire time in relationship to Donovan's score. And so Donovan is often writing very specific parts that there's an example of something that he wrote that he didn't write to be playable by drum kit, but once we realized we were going to have a live drummer, John is the type of person that could figure out how to play something that is unplayable.
Yep.
Oh, man.
We were watching the video the other night and Donovan was like, God bless him.
I will say he's the very strong guy, right?
Yeah.
The moment where you grab his arm, his bicep, and he just like pushes you off stage
Swoon.
is, yeah, I think swoon is maybe a good way to put it. But we're going to be on the lookout for the full version of The Center Will Not Hold. I'm so excited to have had this chance to talk with you both about what you're doing. Thank you both so much for coming on. What a true gift.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.